All right, let's get started. We have a lot of Kabbalah to get to. In fact, today is going to be a unique, you'll see what I mean. Today will be like a unique type of session. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kabbalah Cafe. This is the best way to get your week started. Done. There you go. That's it. Making a statement. Best way to get your week started is right here with a little breakfast, a little food for your body, a little food for your soul. So let's talk about Kabbalah and talk about what I believe is one of the most daring ideas in the mystical tradition. And that is that spirituality and physicality are inextricably linked. In other words, there is a core connection between the physical and the spiritual. There are many spiritual philosophies and disciplines that believe that the spiritual is divorced from the physical. In other words, that the physical serves as a distraction or as a detriment to spirituality. So therefore, you have religions that will say that if you want to be a professional clergy person, we'll just keep it gender neutral, clergy person, right? So you have to disavow certain physical relationships or realities. Right. Right. Without getting specific. Right, exactly. So there are certain, but why? What's the thought process? The thought process is, if you're married to God, you can't be married to a human being. That's kind of the philosophy, right? If you're married to God, if you're exclusive to God, then you're exclusive to God, and that means no other types of commitments, terrestrial, physical, types of commitments. So that's the thought process. And many philosophies, many spiritual pathways have a similar philosophy. So, for example, a spiritual tradition that has it that in order to achieve, spiritual connection, you have to, fast and divest yourself of material pleasures or food or whatever it is, and become, and meditate and climb to the top of a mountain and really like let go of all physical attachments and get rid of your possessions and that sort of thing to attain a spiritual connection. All of that is under the same conceptual construct as what we mentioned a moment ago, which is a person or a viewpoint that says that spirituality is incompatible with materialism, with physicality. And so therefore, you got to choose. It's either or. Either, Sam, good morning. Shakoach for the Shliach Tzibur. So here's the deal. It's like you have to choose, make a choice. Either you're choosing physical and living a physical life, or you're choosing spirituality, and then you have to disavow the material. One of the big things in cults that you find in many cults is this notion of when you come in, what's the first thing they ask you to do? Got to get rid of your possessions. To them. Exactly. Typically, sorry? Right. No, but think about it. It's you. This cult, no one owns. There's no personal property. Oh, you can't have personal property. No, you have to give everything up typically to the charismatic cult leader. Right. That's typically how it works. You got to give everything up to the cult leader. And it's a notion, and it's spun as a spiritual type of, like a spiritual level, like a very profound spiritual level that, if you're still holding on to your stuff, how can you hold on to God? So you have to let it go. Judaism and Kabbalah, which is spiritual component of Judaism, is absolutely radical. And when I say radical, radical is not even a radical enough word. Judaism, Kabbalah is so radical in its thinking because Kabbalah believes and teaches that to say that God or spirituality is incompatible with physicality, with materialism, is to say that God is limited, right? Is to say that the God we believe in is a God that can only exist in one space, but not in another space. Like God's not big enough to be able to contain other experiences. Rather, Kabbalah explains at length in various places and in various forms this core idea. And the core idea, hey Denise, it's good to see you. And the core idea is this. The core idea is that, and this is what I like to call the spiritual law of gravity, or the Kabbalah gravity. What is the spiritual law of gravity, or Kabbalah gravity? You know, what's the regular law of gravity? Help me out here. Give me a working definition. What is up must come down. Good, perfect. Its spiritual gravity is the same thing. It's really the opposite. It's kind of the opposite, but it's the same idea. Whatever's down came from up. In other words, if you see something here, you know this. It must have evolved, or maybe devolved, whatever, but it must have emerged from a spiritual reality that is, in essence, enlivening it and making it what it is. So, and this is not even Kabbalah. I mean, it's Jewish spirituality, but it's not even exclusive to Kabbalah. The Medrash says something fascinating. I'll say it first in the Hebrew, and then I'll share it in the English. Hey guys, good morning. It says, Ein lecha kol esev momata. There is no blade of grass below. She'ein lecha mazal mamayla, that doesn't have a mazal. How would you translate mazal? That's how we translate it. What else is mazal? Mazal would be that's still the luck thing. Mazal is also not just fortune or luck. Mazal is like a star. Yeah, like a star. Mazalot. The mazalot, kochavim mazalot, constellations. It also means like a mazal is also like nozel, like a drip. In other words, it's like a flow. So ein lecha kalesa mumata, she'ein lecha mazal mimayla. There is no blade of grass below that doesn't have a mazal above, and then the Medrash continues that hits it and says grow. Now I know what you're thinking. What? What is this like? Is this like horse racing? Like giddy up? Like let's go. We need to grow. By the way, I'm sure your lawns, all of our lawns, are like not growing so much right now, right? In this deep freeze that we're experiencing. My son is in Chicago. Yeah. So he's like, what's the forecast? Because he's in yeshiva. Yeshiva is kind of, it's not lockdown, but it's kind of like that, like as far as outside information. This is not Brooklyn. The tunnels are in Brooklyn, huh? Interesting. So in Chicago, I'm not sure, they have buildings that are pretty much self-contained. In other words, they have there's a cafeteria there, so they don't really have to get out too much. I learned in yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey. That was fantastic. It was a big building, totally self-contained. That's like the whole winter, you actually didn't have to leave the building. You got everything you needed right there. Maybe, I don't know. Not illegally, yes. Yes. Good. Yes. Excellent. I love what you're saying. I love it. In other words, the idea of this interconnected cycle, that what's up goes down, what's down goes up, is at the heart and soul of Jewish mysticism. That is that there's a connection, a very tight connection between above and below. It's not like two separate realities that have a demarcation in between. In fact, the Medrash says that when God gave the Torah at Sinai, he was essentially breaking the divide between heaven and earth. Because up until Sinai, there's a verse in Hallel that says, I'll sing it. Hashamayim, shamayim la Hashem. Wow, is Kabbalah the musical? Well, no, we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop right there. Hashamayim, shamayim la Hashem, which means, translate the words. The heavens are Hashamayim, shamayim are heavens, la Hashem, unto God. The aretz, and the earth, nasan levnei adam, were given to human beings. And so, what's the message of that verse in Psalms? Heaven is for God and earth is for us. That was the original, I don't know, I'm not going to say plan, but that was the original kind of line of demarcation. It's like you got your space, I got my space, right? You got this side of the tracks, I got that side of the tracks. Little West Side Story going on. The Sharks and the Jets. I always forget. Right, little Sharks and Jets action. So that's right. Again, this is Kabbalah the musical. What? Hamilton should get all the fun? Or Aladdin, as it were? Okay, so here's the deal. So the deal is like this. The way it was originally is that there was this divide between heaven and earth. But then at Sinai, what happens at Sinai? God says that heaven should merge with earth and earth should merge with heaven. And so God says, God descends down to the mountain and he says to Moshe, Aleh elahar, go up the mountain. And so we see this kind of crossover between heaven and earth. So that's why it says, for example, that the patriarchs, again, before Sinai, we'll call that, that's acronym. No, we're not going to do that acronym. But anyway, before Sinai, right? So before Sinai, the patriarchs also did some sort of mitzvah. So for example, Yaakov, Jacob, when he peeled the rods, remember that story? When he peeled the rods, the sticks, to get the animals to birth ringed and spotted and speckled calves and offspring. Remember this? Mm-hmm. Bizarre. It's a little bit like a little strange. It's one of those stories that you read, you're like, sure, let's move on to the next story. It's like, okay, it's a little weird. But anyway, so that our sages say that when he peeled the sticks, right? So, what happens if you have, a stick that has a little bit of bark on it and you're peeling the bark? So typically when you're peeling the bark is a little darker. And you're revealing like a lighter strip, right? Imagine if you're like doing it as a ring. So what does it look like? I know I'm asking you to use your imagination big time here, but it might look like tefillin, right? An arm with tefillin, right? With straps, with black straps around it, right? White and black, white and black, white and black. So it says that when Jacob was doing his thing with the sticks, it was like he was wrapping tefillin. That's what it says. Now, simple question. Aside from the question of, hey, isn't that a stretch? Aside from that question, I'll ask you a question. After he did that thing with the sticks, let's say he had the spiritual intention and whatever. Do you think he was able to throw out the sticks, or they were somehow sacred? What do you think? It says that they were disposable. And I could have gone either way. They were disposable. In other words, the sanctity did not reside, the divine sanctity did not reside in those sticks. Why not? Exactly. Because it was before Sinai. And before Sinai, if you did something spiritual, it remained spiritual. It didn't affect the physical object. It wasn't the spiritual experience did not penetrate, did not permeate the physical item that was used. Today, you have a pair of tefillin, it's holy. A Torah scroll, holy. Mezuzah, holy. All sorts of, every mitzvah object is a chefza shel mitzvah. And therefore, it's holy. And you have to be careful about how you use it. All of this is to say that Judaism has a radical take on spirituality. A take that I believe is different than the vast majority of spiritual traditions. And when you look at spiritual traditions, they might seem to overlap. Oh, they're pretty much all the same. But when you look at it closely, you realize it's very different. Judaism believes that spirituality and physicality, right? The spiritual and the physical, spiritual and the material work together. Like hand in glove. Because ultimately, like I said about the grass, ultimately, everything that's physical has a spiritual spark inside of it, and everything physical has a spiritual spark, and everything spiritual ultimately devolves or manifests in some sort of way in our physical world. Therefore, the following becomes very, very true, but also very fascinating. We can look at the things around us and derive interpretation, explanation, and inspiration into our spiritual service. So, for example, I'll tell you a story. There was once a bar mitzvah boy that came to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, this is back probably in the 1950s or 1960s. When did the Brooklyn Dodgers leave Brooklyn?
Middle 50s.
In the 50s.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is before the Dodgers left. So I'll tell you a few stories about baseball in Brooklyn. So do you know where the Brooklyn Dodgers played? Do you know where Ebbets Field is? Do you know where? Crown Heights. It's like blocks away from Chabad. You know, you can even probably create a tunnel straight to Ebbets Field. Oh, sorry, too soon. Field of Dreams. Ebbets Field does not exist. Ebbets Field was made into apartment complexes, but they still have a sign. I used to drive by it when we lived in New York all the time. So, but anyway, so one time there was a yeshiva student who I happened to know who it was. I mean, he's no longer with us, but whatever. There's no need to mention his name. But he was missing at the evening studies, like the night seder, the night learning. And so the next day, the Rebbe asked him where he was. So he said he was at the baseball game. So he said, which game did you go to? He said he went to the Yankees game. So the Rebbe said, look, if you're going to a baseball game, at least support the local team. At least go local. You go to Yankees Stadium up in the Bronx. They schlep all the way out there. Anyway, so that's one story. But the Rebbe once told the bar mitzvah boy the following.
I don't like the Rebbe.
I don't know if he didn't like the Yankees. Anyway, I think it was more tongue in cheek. Here's the point. The real story is this one. So there was a bar mitzvah boy that came to the Rebbe and kind of was getting some inspiration. I think it was like before his bar mitzvah. And so the Rebbe was trying to communicate to him, sort of like what is the meaning of a bar mitzvah? Like what happens when you turn bar mitzvah? So the Rebbe says to him, are you a baseball fan? He says, yes. By the way, just a quick interlude. So football, right? We're now in football. Baseball is off season right now. So football is what's going on. Last night was almost the coldest game in NFL history. Fourth cold, right? Poor Miami Dolphins. Poor guys. They were freezing. But I'm a Pittsburgh guy. I'm from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's game has been canceled, has been postponed till tomorrow. Because there's an absolute blizzard. They showed last night, the stadium in Buffalo, what it looks like.
Yeah, it's blinding.
It's like snow up to here. It's a wreck. It's like hazardous, like more than hazardous conditions. But back to baseball. So the Rebbe asked this young, about to become bar mitzvah boy, so do you like baseball? Kid says, I love baseball. He says, perfect. He says, so do you go to baseball games? He says, yeah. He says, okay, so what if it's a blowout? I don't know if he used this exact terminology. He says, what if it's like a blowout? Like your team is losing, they're getting crushed. There's no chance for them to come back, and it's getting late. Is there a chance that you might leave? So the kid says, yeah, might leave. He says, what about the players? The players leave? He said, no, the players can't leave.
Oh, yes.
The kid said, no, the players can't leave. What do you mean? That's their job. Rebbe said, until bar mitzvah, you were a fan. You check in a little bit, you're a fan, but you're not so invested. But now when you turn 13, you're on the field. Now you're a player, right? Now you are an absolute player. And as a player, you need to make sure that you're invested. Even when it gets difficult, even when it gets tough, even when it looks, even when the odds are against you, You're in, you can't, there's no checking out. Hotel California, right? You check in, but you can't check out. You're in it to win it. So that was the framing. So there's two ways to understand this. One way is to say that the Rebbe was using, the Rebbe was using an analogy. He was using a life experience to say, hey, here's something that we can learn something from here, and we can derive, something, a metaphor, whatever. There's another way that you can see it, and that is that the Rebbe saw that if something exists in this world, where is it coming from? In other words, what gives even baseball, even something like baseball, what gives it energy? And what gives it energy and what gives it vitality is spiritual energy. And so spiritual energy, spiritual reality is making this be the way it is. And if that's the case, then it has a spiritual lesson. In other words, the integration. It's such a popular Zoom, isn't it? Look at that. With Russian names. I'm trying to be very careful. The biggest problem is if they're going to use names that we know of people, right? To let in. We're gonna let in one person at a time. Anyways,
Hold the capacity.
I'm not telling anybody anything. All right, so here's the deal. It's like, is it that, we're using a random analogy to apply to something spiritual, or do we see within the physical? Do we see within the physical something spiritual? So that's really what it comes down to. And so here's the deal. Today, what we're going to do is, and we're going to jump straight into the text because there's a lot of really beautiful ideas to share. We're going to talk about preparing food, right? Yeah, we had a beautiful breakfast today. The food doesn't make itself. There's prep that's involved. This morning, I was part of the prep. I was cracking eggs. I was checking the. He wanted to use some of the. Some of the real right. So I was checking some eggs and checking some of the. I think it was cilantro or something, whatever it was, rinsing and checking. The point is like this: food doesn't make itself. Food requires prep. You got to get the food. You have to prep the food, and then you have to cook the food. So there are many steps involved when it comes to food preparation. And so what I think is important to recognize, based on this kind of intro, is that nothing that happens in the physical world is divorced from a spiritual meaning. In other words, if something exists here, it's being powered by a spiritual reality. And if that's the case, then it's very likely that it will also have a spiritual analog and therefore a spiritual lesson for us all. So today we're going to look at the spiritual lessons of cooking and dry cleaning or cleaning clothes. That's literally today's conversation. Okay, so let's take these, pass it around. Take one down and pass it around.
So we don't think that everything that's in existence is a complete portrayal of heaven, of the heavenly realm, of God.
Say it again.
Are we to assume or understand that everything that's here with trees and buildings and things, that's a complete representation of God or a complete representation of the heavenly realms in physical?
Yes.
Yeah.
But how we interpret that, what we do with that is definitely up for interpretation, but Kabbalah gives us guidance as to what that means in a very powerful way. Okay, so here we go. Let's jump back in to this text. All right, let me pull this up here. Do we have enough copies? Are we short? Okay. All right, we are up to page 34. No, I'm sorry. We're up to page 36 at the bottom, where it says serving with love. And I'm going to share my my screen. So tempted. Who should I let in?
Don't do it.
There's some that I recognize, but like there's two Tonys now. So great. Now what? One is not kosher.
It's one of the 10?
It's no, it's not one of the no, Ray's on. No, Ray's not on.
Exact
Says this copy, I may have. Okay. Let's do this. I'm going to share my screen so you guys online can see. And here we go. Again, page 36 at the bottom, where it says serving with love. And let's kind of reset inside. So we talked about different types of servants. We talked about a type of servant. Yeah, we talked about a son, and then a simple servant, and then a trusted servant. And we said that when it comes to the son is someone who naturally loves the father and who does everything the father wants with love and with desire and with excitement. And the son intuits what the father wants, because the son, being of the same DNA, the son actually recognizes, what the father likes even before the father sometimes. And so that's the nature of the son. In our spiritual service, that would be a type of spiritual service where the person is so attuned with what God wants and does it out of love and from a place of desire and place of understanding, a place of appreciation, that it's a perfectly loving experience. The downside of that is that at the same time that it's very loving, it's also, right, the challenge is that it's also a little bit too much there's a lot of ego involved, and there's a lot of self. Like I want to serve. I love this. I love to do what God wants. So there's a lot of even though it's at the end of the day serving God. The next category we said was the simple servant. This is someone who serves out of a sense of obligation and a sense of commitment. I'm obligated to do this. I'm committed to do this. This is a yoke that's placed upon me. It has to get done, whether I like it or not. I'm going to do it. That's the simple servant. And then we talked about the loyal servant, or the loving servant, the faithful servant. This is a servant that serves out of a sense of obligation, but at the same time has an appreciation for the one that he's serving. So it's not the son, right? The son doesn't serve. The son is doing out of love. This is someone who's serving. So there is a surrender involved, but the surrender is born of a love and appreciation toward whom one is surrendering to the one that one is surrendering to. So this would be like you and I surrendering to God and saying, I don't know the reason for the mitzvah. I don't necessarily understand it, or I don't necessarily even appreciate it, but I appreciate you. I appreciate you as God. And if you're giving me the mitzvah, then this is what I'm going to do. It's a loyal servant. No, it's kind of like it's kind of in between. I hear what you're saying. I don't know if it's joined together. I think it's like a third category, but it has elements of both. It has elements of surrender of the simple servant, elements of love from the son, but it's neither simple servant nor son. It's a third category. But yeah, that's a good way of framing it, actually. Now, let's start with serving from love, right there, the bottom paragraph on 36. Such a servant, he says, does not serve as if yoked and burdened at all, but rather out of great love. So even though the servant is in a state, in a modality of surrender, it doesn't feel like a burden, but rather out of great love. Let's continue. He desires. Oh, and last time, which was, I think, a few weeks ago, we talked about the example of Yosef and Eliezer. These were servants who were excited about their work, even though they were servants. Okay. He desires for the greatness, wealth, and success of his master, and for his well-being, right? So this is what this servant wants. The servant wants the greatness and the wealth and success of the master, and for his well-being, that he should have pleasure and delight. The servant cares about the master. You see, the simple servant, I don't know how much the simple servant is thinking about the master. It's more of like, I got to do this. I got to get it done. I'm doing it. Whereas this servant, the loving servant, is thinking about the master. Is thinking about giving pleasure and delight to the master. And that encourages and inspires this servant to work even harder. He therefore, let's continue, personally, top of 38, strives with all his might, both in personal attendance, serving the needs of his master's body, food, dress, and drink, such as to arrange a table before him with all types of delicacies that he prepared for him, and to clean and beautify his clothing. So again, what we see here is he's giving some examples of the loving servant. The loving servant cares and is invested in the well-being of the master, to the point that this loving servant is going to personally attend to everything that the master needs, whether it's body, food, dress, and drink. What does that mean? So he breaks it down, such as to, and I know I read this, but I want to read it again a little bit more slowly, such as to arrange a table before him with all types of delicacies that he prepared for him. Okay, so that's one category, preparing food. Preparing a lavish, we had a pretty lavish buffet. We have a pretty lavish buffet over there. Yeah.
Where does this servant, this category, where does his love come from?
Oh, good. So he said before that it comes from an appreciation for the master. He appreciates. This servant has, I don't know if the right word is seichel, but I think a sensitivity. This servant has an appreciation for the depth, for the lofty stature of the master, and is therefore serving the master, not out of a sense of surrender, of subjugation, also surrender, but not just surrender from subjugation, but surrender from a place of positivity and love and excitement. Interesting. Well, the example that we gave is Yosef. So Yosef is sold as a slave to Potiphar. But yet, even under Potiphar, he's not like just, miserable and serving and then going to his quarters and retreating. He's a guy who's fully present. He's engaged. He has a chen about him. He has a charm about him. In other words, he's showing up in a positive way, not in a depressed and crushed way, even though I'm sure he would rather not be there serving this guy in Egypt. But he's there, he shows up. The implication here is that on some level, he appreciates the job that he has, or he appreciates the one whom he's serving.
And there's somewhere where it says in the structure how you treat your servant.
Mm-hmm.
They eat where you eat.
Yes.
They stay where you stay.
100%. If you only have one meal, you got to give it to the one who works for you.
The quality is supposed to be the same. So
Exactly.
isn't this sort of being reciprocal on the part of the servant?
You could say that.
Gratitude. He's already gotten something for it if it goes
Yeah.
according to plan.
And the question is, chicken and egg, like which comes first? Is it does the servant show up that way first? Does the master show up that way? Do they both show up that way? Probably in a healthy situation. Jeff, do you have something? No. David?
Top 36 talks about what you said, why does he love him? Because he recognizes the greatness of the master.
Yeah.
And also, by Yosef, he knew who his master was, which was the Abishur. So, like you said before, he schlepped the Abishur with him. That's how he was a Ish Matzliach.
Right.
So, who was Joseph's master? It wasn't Potiphar. It was the Abishur, was God. And that made him a proper vessel for any type of.
I like what you're saying. In other words, we could say that maybe his master was never Potiphar. He happened to be working for that guy, but his work, he felt, was a spiritual work because God had put him in that position. So whatever he is called upon to do, he looks at it not just as heeding the wishes of a human being, taskmaster or whatever, or whoever that guy is, but really heeding the wishes and desires of the true master. And that gives him inspiration. That probably is more aligned with the reality, which is why it doesn't matter that Potiphar is whoever he is, he's showing up with his best self, excited to do the work because he's a shliach. He's a messenger of Hashem. Yeah, I like that. Good.
Parent treats the child never gets the same appreciation and
Right.
respect. No matter, we're supposed to honor his parent, but to love the parent and everything, the parent is half that person. It's the same thing here. There's connections go both ways.
Right.
I think
It's a reciprocal situation. Yeah.
I think it has to start at the top, not all the way down. It's not the person in charge has to earn that respect.
Yeah. Very well said. Yeah. So now he gets into what does it mean to cook? What does it mean to spiritually cook and prepare food? So he mentioned two things right before the next section: preparing food and cleaning clothing. Right, the servant prepares the meal and also washes the clothes. What does that mean spiritually? And like I said before in the pregame, it's not just randomly using this as an analogy. It's understanding that because human beings have a need to prepare and cook food, and we have a need to clean our clothing, it also is being driven by a spiritual reality. And there's therefore an intrinsic spiritual analog to everything that exists in the physical space. Now let's do this inside, preparing delicacies. And he puts this in the original in parentheses. That's why you see this entire section in parentheses. There's multiple pages of parentheses here because it's all explaining spiritually what we just said a servant physically does. The meaning of this in the analog, here we go. The preparation of delicacies for the master is a metaphor for the spiritual work of refinement. Now, let me share with you the Hebrew word. In the Hebrew, it's known as avodat habirurim. That literally is translated as the work of borer. How would you translate borer in English? Selecting. I'll share with you a quick background here. On Shabbat, there are 39 categories of work that are prohibited. One of the categories of work that's prohibited is called borer. Borer is selecting. So, for example, if you have a bowl of fruit salad in front of you, and you, for whatever reason, are anti-kiwi, let's just say. I don't mean,
How dare you?
How dare you, right? How dare you? Or let's say you're allergic to kiwi. Yeah, I used to be allergic to kiwi. But this is my story. I grew out of a lot of food allergies. Not seriously allergic, but just like we get like itchy, scratchy, whatever. You know, like a little bit of allergic reaction. So kiwi was one of those things. Huh? I didn't have a lot of allergies. When I ate kiwi, my throat got a little itchy, so I avoided it. So imagine you have a bowl of kiwi, a bowl of a bunch of different things, cut up fruit, including kiwi. And so you're like, all right, I don't want the kiwi. So you take out the kiwi with your hand and you move it to the side, off to another plate or to whatever napkin. That is borer. That's prohibited on Shabbat. And I know what you're thinking. What? Prohibited on Shabbat? What kind of work is this? Oh, correct. So the way to do it is, when it comes to borer, you can't take out the bad or the undesired from the desired to get rid of it. That's called borer. But what you can do is only eat what you want to eat, because then you're not selecting, you're eating. See, if you take out the stuff that you don't want, then you're selecting. That's borer. That's not okay. God's like, that's way too much work. Stop doing that. Whereas it's one of the works, anyway, that's another conversation. However, if you're, no, the 39 categories of work are what they did when they built the Mishkan and they built the tabernacle. So one of the things that they did was this type of selection. So it's not like all work is forbidden. It's specific categories of work. And this is borer, selecting, choosing is one of the categories of work. But again, if you have a fruit salad or a mixture in front of you and you select what you want and you eat it in the context of eating it, that's fine. But sorting and organizing, that's something we don't do on Shabbos. Now, the Kabbalists, the mystics tell us that our work spiritually throughout our lifetimes is this borer. What is borer? Borer means kind of not just selecting, but really dividing, separating, creating delineation. This is good, or this is desirable, this is not desirable. I want this, I don't want that. Making choices. The mystics say this is ultimately the work of life, because the work of life is God puts us in this world, and everything that we encounter, including Zoom, has good and has not good, positive elements and not positive elements. And our job is, our calling is to interact with this world and to engage with the stuff around us, but to be very selective, borer, to be selective, to only take the stuff that's good and to reject the stuff that's not so good. So for example, when it comes to food, So certain foods are good for the soul, certain foods are not good for the soul. When it comes to work, right? Certain activities at work, right, are good for our soul and certain ones are not good for the soul. So when it comes to life itself is really a large borer project where everything's in a bowl together, everything's dumped, in one big bowl in front of us. We have all of these things in life that we encounter, and our job is to be very selective and to recognize this is healthy, this is not healthy. Now, borer is forbidden on Shabbat, and the deeper meaning of that is as follows. Borer means that we're selecting because we recognize that some things are good and some things are not good. On Shabbat, the worlds are elevated. And what that means on Shabbat is that things are to a heightened state that we don't need to be so selective as we are throughout the week. So for example, give you a simple example. When it comes to eating, the mystics tell us that when we eat, we should recognize that the real objective of eating is not just to eat something that tastes good, but to gain the energy from the food to allow us to do the next big mitzvah. So let's just make this very simple. Imagine an intention for eating. Imagine this week, you have a kavana, you have an intention that every time you sit down to a meal, you're going to think about the following. You're going to think about how God created the food. Obviously, the farmer and everyone involved in the process, is involved. But ultimately, God has given me this food. And this food contains not just physical substance, but also spiritual energy. And my soul, which is a human soul, requires the spiritual energy in elements that are beneath me, as it were, in the scale of existence. Because we know there's domem, someach, chai, and medaber. There's inanimate life, vegetation, animal life, and human life. And human beings need the things beneath us, i.e. things on a lower level, which makes no sense because usually the things below need the things above. Why should something above need something below? Why should you and I need to eat a vegetable? Makes no sense. I know what you're thinking, because we need to eat. That's already how it is. But how does it make sense that it is like that? Spiritually. And so the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah explains in his discourses on the Torah portions, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, says that there's a simple reason. It's because the soul of the vegetable is greater than the soul of the human being in its source. And the way it works is the lower a thing is, the higher it came from. You know what they say? The bigger you are, the harder you fall. The higher the light above, the lower it falls. So the divine sparks in the food, that's in the earth and in vegetation and animals, even though they are quote unquote lower than us, those sparks of God are actually greater than the sparks that we have inside, which is why we need the food. We need those sparks. So now we're presenting, I'm trying to kind of paint a picture of a bit of a meditation here. So when you're sitting down to eat, think about this. Think about how the food in front of me is not just physical calories. It contains spiritual light, a light that's greater than the light that I possess on my own. And that's why the Torah says in Deuteronomy, Devarim, Ki lo ala lechem levado yichya ha'adam. Man does not live on bread alone. Ki al kol motza pi Hashem yichya ha'adam. But rather on the utterance of God does man live. What does that mean? It means that when we eat, we're not just eating the bread, we're eating the word of God. We're eating a divine spark that's in the food. That's how Kabbalah explains it.
So the lowest forms are just basically the analogy, the basic ingredients that have to be enhanced.
Exactly. The lowest forms, right? The lowest forms have a higher potential. They need us to fulfill its potential. How do we fulfill the potential? We fulfill the potential by eating it, inculcating, taking in, imbibing the energy, and using it to do something positive. Preparing it first, right? So what's
Say that all of the sparks are equal, whether it's a vegetable or a cow.
so it says that it says in Kabbalah that the lower it is, the higher it is. So typically domem, someach, chai, medaber. Typically inanimate, vegetation, animal, human. So that's- Yeah,
From the dirt.
right. The lowest. We are,
Read the other part.
right? You create them living beings. Yeah, you could say that the human being is an amalgam of the lowest and the highest. A soul from above and the earth. So the idea here is that food contains incredible light. But, and here's the big caveat. The big caveat when it comes to eating is that it's important to have that intentionality, because the intentionality itself prevents the culinary experience from becoming simply one of material feeding. In other words, a person could sit down to a meal and have their favorite food, whether it's a steak or whether it's a salad or anything in between. And a person can be completely, since the greater it is, the lower it falls, a person can also be trapped by the food and be sucked into that experience to not see the forest from the trees and not realize that this is an elevatory experience and to believe that it's only a gastronomical experience. The idea of borer, of being selective, is about mindset. It's about, I'm about to eat the food, but before I eat the food, I say a bracha, I recite a blessing. And the bracha serves as a moment for a meditation. And the meditation is, the food that I'm eating has a divine spark inside of it. A greater divine spark than the sparks that I already have inside of myself, which is why I need it, but at the same time, it needs me, because it's trapped, right? It's trapped inside a husk of food, and it can't fulfill its purpose on its own. It needs me, I need it. So when I'm eating now, my intention is that I'm not just eating it because it looks good, it tastes good, or I bought it at this. I'm eating it because it has divine spark. And so therefore I'm able to separate out the experience from being one of purely physical satisfaction to an experience of being one of spiritual work. Borer. That is the borer. And so I will minimize my indulgence in the physical and recognize that it is more of a spiritual experience than a physical experience. That's the idea of borer. On Shabbat, it's different. There's no borer. You know why there's no? Wait 1 second. Let me just round out this point. On Shabbat, there's no borer. Why? You don't need to select. Why? Because on Shabbat is a day of oneg, day that we're supposed to have pleasure, which means even the pleasure of eating is a mitzvah. So we don't have to be so discerning to say that I'm only eating for the spiritual element, but not for the physical pleasure, because even the physical pleasure itself is a mitzvah on Shabbat. So therefore, I don't need to have that borer. But all of that is a bit of a deeper dive than what might be necessary to understand this. His point here is like this. When we talk about a servant preparing food for the master, anytime you talk about food in Kabbalah, that is a trigger in a positive way. That's a trigger for the work of borer. And borer is not just by eating. It's not just when we eat, we should have in mind that we're eating not for the physical exclusively, but also for the spiritual. That's not only by eating, it's by everything that we do. It's about going through life in a discerning way, recognizing that this is kosher, that is not kosher. This is okay to do, that's not okay to do in the same experience. There was a young girl that once asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is nuclear power, is that good or not good? The Rebbe said to the girl, do you have a knife at home in your kitchen? And she said, yes. He said, is the knife good or not good? She said, well, it depends on how you use it. The Rebbe said, exactly. Everything that has power, right, has a lot of power, could either be used for a lot of good or the opposite. This is the choice that you and I make, right? The choice, that's Bora. Bora means to be selective. That when we use a knife, when we go to work, when we prepare our meals, how are we doing? Bora means to be selective about our intentionality. How are we doing it? How are we engaging? Jeff.
I don't mean this disrespectful, but
That's a bad start.
is there also a spirituality if you're eating truth?
Good question. Good question. So it's interesting because when it comes to not kosher, so the Alter Rebbe in Tanya explains that the sparks in the not kosher food are so embedded in the husk of the non-kosher that they aren't, we're not able to capitalize on those sparks. The only way to capitalize on those sparks is to reject it. In other words, in the supermarket is to walk by it, because rejecting it, imagine you have an orange versus what's that? No, I'm not going, no, you'll see where I'm going. What's a nut that has a very hard shell? Brazil nut. Good. Brazil nut. So imagine you have an orange versus a Brazil nut. What's the difference? An orange you can peel easily, a banana you peel easily, and the Brazil nut you gotta break it. You gotta break it to access it. So some things you can access it straightforward. Some things you gotta break it. So when it comes to, let's say, kosher food, you can access the sparks straightforward by accessing it. Whereas the only way to access the sparks when it comes to not kosher is by rejecting it. Rejecting it is what allows those. Its purpose, the sparks in that food, its purpose is not to be eaten. So that's how so usually when it comes to food that's neutral, accessible, sparks, you access it by engaging in a mindful way, utilizing the energy for a mitzvah. But when it comes to something that starts off, that the husk itself is making it inaccessible, the only way to access it is by not using it. Anyway, it's a good question. There's a whole chapter in Tanya. Well, there's a whole chat. It's not that's all. I can't take any credit for it. It's all Tanya. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. So, God created animals by speaking, but he created us by speaking and breathing.
Yes.
So we're a deeper part
Correct.
of God, but we're, in a sense, a lower level.
Oh, excellent question.
And the other part of that is, so I understand that we are at a lower level because we can, have freedom of choice and say no. But what about, what makes, a animal or a plant a lower level than a rock? Because it seems like those are all instinctual, like the rock and the animal, they're all still instinctual, even though they can talk and maybe they are making decisions.
Okay, so the first question is a very good question. You're asking, how are we saying that the lower something is, the higher its source, when we know that the human soul is coming from the breath of God, from the essence of God? What does that even mean? That's a very good question. And I don't know that there's an easy answer, but in some places in Kabbalah and Chassidus, it says that the human being has the greatest soul. But another place it says that even though it's conceptually the greatest soul, as things play out, there is an advantage or a superiority in lower forms of sparks that fall in lower spaces than the ones even within us. There might be on a few different levels.
Maybe because the human has the spark.
Yeah.
But the animal just doesn't have it.
Right, and maybe that's like kind of ties into your second point.
Create or destroy. So we have, it's almost like
We have a lower.
whatever decision making is flawed. Whatever we have that's decision making is flawed because we can create or destroy. And at least the animal and the plant and the rock, they're always just providing and keeping the place
Right.
going. But what makes an animal different than a plant? Than a rock?
In Kabbalah, the distinction is that there's the idea of like moving, like so rocks don't move. And inanimate, it's in Hebrew, it's called domain, which means silent. They don't speak. There's no noise. I mean, water makes a sound. Water would be also domain, and it certainly makes a sound. Movement makes this, and it does move. But I think the understanding is that it's not moving itself. It itself is not moving. It's gravity that's pulling it. It's not really moving on its own. Whereas vegetation has a growth that's happening, but it's still stuck. Animals have growth and movement, and they're not stuck. They're not tethered to one space. So there are a lot of, sorry?
Animal depends on the plants.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, we all do. The plants depend
On the earth, correct.
So you go up and down.
Exactly. So there's a need that goes down as well. Right. Good, Larry.
So, how about humans? By all humans or just Jewish humans?
Oh, good. About kosher? So kosher specifically is a Jewish thing. The idea is that, for the Jewish soul, kosher is optimized food, right? Imagine if you can buy like optimized food, like for your specific, it's like if you buy a sports car, right? And it says only use I don't know, premium gas, like the higher numbers, what was it, 90 something, what is 90, 93. So you want to take care of it. You're not going to put in the 87 pedestrians. Who does that? It's Bohemians. Right? You want to put in the good stuff. So it's not just that kosher is better. It's really spiritually attuned to the Jewish mission. Now, if the next question is, well, how do you explain that and why? Kosher ultimately comes down to the category of mitzvot that we call chok, which means we have no idea, right? But trust the manufacturer. The manufacturer says, yeah, only use this gas. I don't want to outsmart them. I don't want to presume that I know better than the manufacturer. Like, what do I know? So look, and again, with kosher, it's not all or nothing, right? If we put in 87, all right, but next time we could put in 93. In other words, for
Regular, organic,
and spiritual, kosher gasoline. One thing, by the way, that I'm sure all of you have heard me say this before, but like a cute framing of this entire concept that I like to share is that no one ever takes a selfie when filling up gas. It's like, look at me filling up, like maybe you that has right or something, right? But right, then you're accept, but then it's the money, it's not the gas. But when it comes to food, we're always taking selfies of our food. And it's understandable because we get excited about food, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, the meditation today, which I think would be a good meditation, for the week. We do a week at a time, meditation. Meditation for this, for this week about food, because today's topic is about food, is about, when I sit down to a meal this week, let me pause for a moment. As I say the blessing, or before I say the blessing, or after I say the blessing, pause for a moment to think about where the food came from, how ultimately it comes from Hashem, and how ultimately this food is designed to give the energy, to provide the energy that I need to do the next good thing. So it's really like filling up a car, where I'm filling it up in order to keep on going. I'm filling up my body and my soul to keep on going forward, and I'm elevating the experience. I'm elevating the food that I am imbibing, that I am integrating into my flesh and blood to carry it to the next purpose, which means that we have a responsibility. If we take a living being, like a plant, which is alive, or an animal, right? If we take a living being and sever it from its life force by either cutting the vegetable or by, ending the life of the animal, that's a big achrayot. That's a big responsibility. And the question is, that's almost demanded of us is, so you took the life of a living being. What are you doing to justify that? How are you justifying that? How are you elevating it? If you're just eating it and having a degrading experience, a human being so excited about food, I mean, for an animal, okay, because what else can an animal do? But for a human being to only eat like an animal, it's unbecoming. It's not so nice. Pasnished. It's not so appropriate. And in that case, we're not elevating the animal or the plant for that matter. And so it's not just about, animals have a life that we're taking. Vegetables also are alive. A plant is alive. What makes that life less alive? And so if we're pulling out something from the earth, right? We're pulling out something from the earth. We have it behooves us to have a little bit of awareness and mindfulness and feel that we are given the responsibility almost to take a life, but then to use it for a higher purpose. And when we do that, it justifies obviously the entire experience. But that's the meditation. So let's read out. We just have like another paragraph and a half, and then we'll close it out to today. Next week we'll talk about dry cleaning, or not dry cleaning. Next week we'll talk about laundering, not money. We'll talk about laundering clothing. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start again from the top of the paragraph just because I don't remember exactly where we started. I want to get a quick running start. The meaning of this in the analog, preparing delicacies. The preparation of delicacies for the master is a metaphor for the spiritual work, a refinement. That means, again, separating good from bad. Both the refinement of the facets of the animal soul, that means the internal refinement that we do to take what's good about the animal soul and reject what's not so good, as well as the fixing and refinement of all material things with which the servant of God is engaged and from which he receives vitality. In other words, work, eating, etc. So I didn't mention the first part, which is the internal refinement. That might be the most, he puts that as first. That's probably the most important one, is to accept some parts of our personality and to reject other parts. When I say parts of our personality, I mean, like if our animal soul is getting us excited about hurting someone else, we should probably reject that. The good stuff we should take, the negative stuff, reject. And that's called separating, borer, separating good, not good. Let's continue. He refines the above by engaging with them solely, like we said about food, for the sake of heaven. And he will not be vulgarized, God forbid, by any indulgence. In other words, with the right meditation, with the right mindfulness, when it comes to, for example, food, so then food will be a refined experience and not a vulgar or a common. How would you translate fe? You translate fe. It's like, that's what you're doing. Fe. Who does that? All right. He will not crave it with the craving and desire of the heart. Rather, his intention will be for the sake of heaven alone, etc. That is the service of borer, of refinement. The first type of servant, remember the first type of servant? That's the one who's hunched over, who feels the yoke, and who's like serving completely out of surrender. The first type of servant would fulfill the above out of fear and dread of God, as shall be explained. But the second type of servant, however, which is the one that we're talking about now, which is the loving servant, would fulfill the above out of love for an attachment to God, i.e. to create pleasure and delight on high, as explained in Tanya chapter 27 and the end of chapter 33. So again, here we have the distinction between the two types of servants, kind of coming full circle. The son, yeah, we know the son. The son loves it all. Son loves the father, gets it. Sure, easy peasy. The servant is serving out of a sense of yoke and obligation, but there's two types. One is completely out of obligation and subjugation. The other is out of love and appreciation and attachment. And that is what we're talking about here, the servant. In other words, you and I, who sit down to a meal and recognize that we have been given an opportunity to make a difference. To, when we cut the food on our plate, we're also being able to divide not just the steak, but able to divide what is desirable about this experience and what is a little bit too animalistic about this experience, to make sure that what we're eating is not only kosher in the literal sense, but also kosher in the figurative sense, that we're eating like a mensch, and we're not eating like a behemoth. You know what a behemoth is? Like a big animal. Right. Well, if it's a good enough buffet, we'll make an exception. We'll do some grazing. Listen, here's the thing. Food is used as a major metaphor in Kabbalah because number one, it's an activity we do all the time, but also because the stakes, all puns intended, are very high. Oh, terrible. Yes. Throw some eggs at me. Make sure they're scrambled. Anyway. Yes, stakes on the stakes. Here's the deal. The stakes are high. It's a common activity, but also because it is such a, well, do I have a third point? I don't know if I have a third point anymore. Anyway, it's a common activity. The stakes are high and it makes a difference, right? How we eat makes a difference. Okay, good. So we're closing it out for today. So again, next week, we're gonna do the same thing, but regarding cleaning clothing, right? When you launder your clothing, seems like a very mundane experience. What is the spiritual parallel or the spiritual experience of cleaning clothing? We'll talk about how cleaning clothing has to do with the way you do a mitzvah. The way you and I do, not just doing a mitzvah, but the way in which we do a mitzvah. You can do it with dirty clothes. You can do it with clean clothes. So all of that is coming up next week. So my inspiration again, my attempt at inspiration today, and my suggestion would be, I'm looking back at, shut up. I'm glad to see everyone is still here. Frank, you weren't expecting that this morning, were you?
No. That was
I don't know what you guys saw. I quickly closed my computer. I don't know if it was still going on.
I was trying to disconnect all those people that were popping in.
There was too many buttons for me to effectively navigate. I froze under pressure. The only thing I could do was close my computer so I wouldn't see anything. Oh man, yes is the answer. Well, not really. It was like just anyway. We'll talk after the class, after the recording is over. Here's the deal. Here's the point. The point is this week, today was about food. Well, today was about finding spirituality and physicality, but the ultimate payoff was about food. So this week, let us recognize that the food that we've been given a gift, the gift to eat in an elevated fashion. Everything in life derives energy from something else, right? The plant from the soil, the animal from the plant, the human from all of the above. So the message is, how can we eat in a human way, like a mensch? And that requires mindfulness to discern between what is holy about this experience and what is not so holy about the experience. To eat in a healthy way, to be able to demarcate our plates and say, this is good, this is not good. And on Shabbat, even the pleasure is good. So that's why there's no borer on Shabbat. That's why he almost
So why can't we separate?
basically,
Shop?
huh?
So you said no borat, so why can't you separate them?
Spiritually, there's no borer, but practically, no kiwi for you. Anyway, all right. So here's the deal. Oh, me too. Well, used to. So that's the message for today. Thank you for joining. A few quick announcements. Number one, Tuesday night. I think it's going to be cold Tuesday, but it's going to be very warm here. So we're having a very special event Tuesday night. Many of us have been rocked, both and on many different levels, our faith, intellectually, ideas that we've had, emotionally, by the recent events of the last, few months in Israel, as well as experiences in our own community and our own families. Yeah, etc. So, and a question that I have received, that I've been asked and have discussed many times in personal conversations, is about the idea of maintaining faith, even when it seems like there's a lot of negative stuff going on. Simply a question like, how could a good God allow such horror to happen in the Holy Land? To well-meaning, to good people. How do we reconcile that? How do we keep on going faith? So we have a very special evening, and an evening we're calling an evening of inspiration, with Devori Kreiman. She is a speaker from Los Angeles. She speaks around the world. She wrote a book as well about finding faith and maintaining faith even amidst very difficult circumstances and challenges. This is the event that's happening Tuesday night, right here, 7:30 p.m. Finding faith when your faith is shaken. Please join us. It is going to be a very powerful event and a very, I would say, uplifting and inspiring event. So join us. I have a bunch of these flyers, so you can take one. So it's a free event, but it's good to register. That way we know, you have a sense. We'll do like a reception, some sushi and wine beforehand. Oh, maybe I should have led with that. So there's an opportunity wait 1 second. Let me start again. There's an opportunity this week to practice borer, to eat the sushi. I don't know if we're gonna be able to zoom in. Yeah. Yes. So number one, it's all kosher. Number one. Number two, we'll all have the opportunity to practice the borer. We're only eating it for the sake of heaven. However, it should be pretty good. So some wine and sushi. There are a few very special dedications. The event is being sponsored by Dovi and Mushka Barber in honor of Dovi's mother's upcoming 10th yard site, and in honor of Ashira Rabinowitz, a young girl from this community who recently passed away. And the additional event sponsorship is by Jeff and Diane Bland. Thank you guys. And loving memory of Marlene Chastain, Arthur Kurtz, and Ashira Rabinowitz, members of the community who, again, recently have passed away. And again, this event is really about coming together and asking the questions and the stuff that we all feel inside. And that, sometimes we question ourselves for questioning, but the question is valid. But the more important thing is to be able to come together and to get a pathway forward for maintaining our faith amidst challenge, amidst difficult times. And that's what's going to be happening Tuesday night. So please join us. It might be cold outside, but again, it'll be very warm here. So come on out, tell your friends. Again, it's a free event, sushi, wine, and inspiration. 7:30.